He was asked on Fox News what he would do if Netanyahu goes to New York and he's the mayor of New York. It's amazing to me that he didn't back down. He said that he's gonna, as you've mentioned, he's gonna arrest Netanyahu.
Because it's popular. It's increasingly popular on the right too. I mean, Steve Bannon, former Trump chief of staff, just called for Netanyahu to be removed in a coup attempt. I mean, Netanyahu. Israel is polling in single digits among Democrats in the US. When Democrats are asked in every poll, do you support Israel? Only about 6 or 7% now say yes. So why would Mamdani suddenly take the pro-Israel line?
Yeah. Here is a clip in which Steve Bannon is talking with your favorite influencer on X, Laura Loomer, talking about Israel and the policy within the MAGA movement. Here is what they said.
People to remember that we could have had the hostages out. We could have had the hostages out 2 years ago, but it was the Qataris that were providing safe haven to the leaders of Hamas so that they weren't killed by the IDF. Are those our allies? Where are the dead bodies of the American hostages that we were told that were going to be turned over weeks ago when this peace deal was finalized? Where are the bodies? We don't have the bodies yet. Qatar controls Hamas at the end of the day. They do. So I think that we need to have a real conversation, Steve, in the GOP, and hopefully, amid all this Israel derangement syndrome that we're seeing from many people on the right, you don't see these people ever talk about Islam. You don't ever.
Max, I will play it out again for you. But the first point is to make Qatar, Doha, an enemy of the United States. How is that going to help Israel in the strategy they have, as Laura Loomer is talking about?
It's everything she's talking about is an attempt to deflect from the reality of Israel, its special relationship with the US. Qatar is a deflection, first because Qatar is not, it doesn't represent a separate system or a counter-hegemonic system in the way that Iran does. In many ways, it's part of the same system as Israel in the US, but it plays a intermediary role between other counter-hegemonic forces and that system. Turkey plays a similar role. Qatar also is pumping tons of money into the US, into US influencers, into the GOP, but it's not necessarily pumping money into pro-Palestine or Palestine solidarity forces. That's the problem. But what she's trying to do is deflect from the fact that Israel is overtly paying $7,000 per post to the trashiest influencers on the internet. It's openly pumping Israeli government money into Instagram influencers, into CNN commentators, taking any public figure it can on propaganda tours of Israel and basically capturing them. So this is all a deflection, along with the whole notion that Qatar is some kind of enemy of the United States. I could care less if the Laura Loomer force Qatar to withdraw its F-16 training program inside the United States, which it's obviously paid for, which presents no threat to American national security because of the actual role that Qatar plays in the world. But I want to go further than that and join with Laura Loomer and all anti-Qatar neocon Likudnik forces in calling for the US to remove its Al Udeid air base from Qatar. Let's just, let's end that relationship right there. Remove the largest US air base from the Middle East that it uses to attack civilians and countries all across the region, which was the sort of head of the snake in the US assault on Iran, which has helped supply Israel's genocidal forces, basically resupplying the rail cars to Auschwitz. Will Laura Loomer call for the withdrawal of the US from the Al Udeid air base in Qatar? Because I would love to see that, and I would totally support that. And so would all peace-loving Americans.
Yeah. it seems that Steve Bannon suggested in this interview that the removal of Benjamin Netanyahu would somehow change the tone, the policy in Israel. Here is what he said. Max.
We'll talk about the threat of Islam, Steve, and they got to stop being so obsessed with Israel and so obsessed with the Jews. You know, it's not the Israelis that are going to have another 9/11 here in our country.
No. Hang on a second. If Netanyahu and if the Israeli government had dealt straight with us, you wouldn't have had this problem. They're liars. They've been stone cold liars. They gave bad information. So I'm not going to let that go unchallenged. That's just bullshit.
But I am not sitting here defending Netanyahu. What I'm asking for is that all these, I just want them to dedicate 5%.
Hang on. You say Israeli derangement syndrome. It's not Israeli derangement syndrome. I certainly don't have it. What I have is the Greater Israel Project. That was never done, and no due diligence was done. The American people never signed off that. The Trump administration never signed off on that. That's a Netanyahu. We need regime change in Jerusalem, and we need it tonight. Okay? Everything that comes out of Netanyahu's government is a stone cold lie. Okay?
Is that going to solve the problem the United States has with Israel?
Well, he obviously figures in MAGA and probably Donald Trump himself loathe Netanyahu. Everyone loathes him. Charlie Kirk loathed him. Everyone who's had to deal with him loathes him. He's manipulative. He's a bully. He's a thug. He gets what he wants from a country that is whose political and financial establishment is largely under his thumb. That's why we're seeing the ceasefire collapse in Gaza, because there's no leverage that Trump can or will exert on Netanyahu or Israel. But of course it won't solve the problem. The problem is Zionism. The problem is this ethno-supremacist system, which requires a permanent state of war, endless occupation, in order to maintain its settler colonial character. And it cannot consolidate its hold on Greater Israel because of the resistance, indigenous resistance and resistance from this resistance axis that spans from Iran to Yemen. And so it's constantly at war. It's now at war inside the United States, and Laura Loomer is one of its warriors. So that's the issue. It will be at war after Netanyahu, and but removing Netanyahu will weaken Israel significantly. It doesn't really have a figure like Netanyahu who can fill his shoes. He's actually widely hated in Israel, but he has more support than any other Israeli figure. So if someone like Yair Lapid comes in, he'll be a weak prime minister that will rely on a lot of right-wing support. It will basically be kind of like a wide-ranging coalition government, and he'll probably have to trade power with someone like Naftali Bennett, who comes from Likud, who came up under Netanyahu's watch from within the Likud party, who is a major supporter of the settlement enterprise. And Yair Lapid and Netanyahu are completely on the same page when it comes to war on Iran and manipulating the United States into the war. There's literally no difference between Netanyahu and any Israeli opposition figure on the key issues of apartheid, occupation, war with Iran, or deceiving and manipulating the American public. The difference is the tone and the talent level. And no one has the talent or the experience that Netanyahu has had in being able to manage the relationship with the United States, which is actually managing the United States.
Max, what's your take on the annexation of the West Bank? Donald Trump and his administration, he sent J.D. Vance to Israel, then Rubio. They're talking about no annexation of the West Bank to Israel. But Netanyahu came out, and in Hebrew, he had an interview. He was asked how does he feel about what Donald Trump is talking about. He said that we are an independent nation, so we're going to decide about our future. How do you see these sort of differences between the two administrations?
Well, J.D. Vance was not the first president or vice president to be humiliated on a visit to Israel, where the Knesset voted to annex the West Bank. I mean, this is a deliberate attempt to humiliate him. And I mean, this happened under Obama. It's happened under previous presidents. And they know that while J.D. Vance struck back rhetorically and said it was weird and crazy of them to do that, that's about all they're going to get. The real state of play could never be more clear, which is that the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public, the Knesset, Israel's so-called Jewish and democratic state, which is Jewish toward Arabs and democratic towards Jews, wants to annex the West Bank and formalize their apartheid system, and then begin ethnically cleansing Palestinians from the West Bank, and to completely remove the Palestinian Vichy Authority based in Ramallah, which in some ways would be welcome, because then we would be dealing with Israel as it truly is in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority's existence prevents the so-called international community from recognizing that Israel maintains an apartheid system in the West Bank. It creates the facade of Palestinian governance, of a de facto Palestinian state, when there's no such thing, and the PA collaborates directly with the Israeli army. Of course, removing the PA will create misery for over 1 million people living in Palestinian cities in Area A. That's where Israel's going. But the so-called gatekeepers of the Israeli military intelligence establishment know that formalizing apartheid through the annexation of the West Bank is a poison pill and will accelerate Israel's demise on the world stage, especially as the European powers recognize Palestinian statehood. And what they aim to do is what they're currently doing, which is to annex the West Bank without annexing it formally. And that means giving the settlers Polaris all-terrain vehicles to be able to reach any point in the West Bank in the hills, to terrorize shepherds, to kill their flocks, to burn their olive groves, sending the military to escort the settlers, to commit acts of terror. The video that we've seen of elderly Palestinians harvesting their olives throughout the South Hebron Hills or north of Ramallah in the rural areas and being terrorized is copious this week. This is an aim to ethnically cleanse areas B and C, the rural areas and the so-called, mixed areas in the West Bank, and move everyone into Area A, which are walled off cities that are essentially cantons. And so the West Bank is already being annexed, but without formally doing it, to avoid the political price that Israel will pay. I mean, in 2024, under Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, the settlers were essentially deputized and given Israeli army uniforms and M4 rifles to go terrorize Palestinian farmers and rural communities. And now we're seeing an escalation. The West Bank is at war. I mean, it's a war on all Palestinians in the West Bank, and you get almost no coverage from Western media of this war.